happen. We have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And happy National Coming Out Day, which we are, as we are taping, but the news is mostly bad. The Justice Department tells Americans that they can discriminate all they like if they have a religious or moral reason, and that transgender Americans are not protected under anti-discrimination law.
But we have our guest, James Esseks, here, director of the ACLU's LGBT and HIV Project. He's going to help us sort out the new LGBT attacks from the Trump administration and tell us how we're fighting back?
Yes.
Okay.
Trump made sure this week that the rainbow flag at the Stonewall National Monument is not on federal land.
This is quite a story. We've just come from there. This is how we didn't celebrate National Coming Out Day. We will give you all the juicy details. Meanwhile, Mississippi's anti-LGBT law went into effect this week, but some clerks and businesses there say they will not take advantage of it.
Yeah, and another semi-positive story. In response to a lawsuit from Equality Utah, the Utah State Board of Education says it won't discriminate against LGBTQ students. Radical
gay activist Charley Shively died at 79 in Boston.
The Pope has launched yet another attack on transgender people.
I thought he was our friend.
He does, well, certainly not to the transgender people.
Tom Price is gone from HHS, but the Trump administration continues to undermine the Affordable Care Act, telling insurers that they don't have to cover birth control if they have a religious or moral objection to it. When are they going to respect our morals?
Well, I'm going to bring this up with James Esseks of the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project, and I was just going to start by saying, in a week of outrages, what stands out in your mind?
Well, there are so many things on that list. But look, I'd like to start with this guidance that comes out from Attorney General Sessions last Friday. That is something we've been expecting for a good while. Yes, it goes on for 25 single-spaced pages.
Many pages.
And this, just to sort of set the stage for this, this is, you know, about religious exemptions, but I want people to understand that it's not a new issue, that people would try to use religion to justify discrimination. It's been going on for a long time. But in the LGBT movement, this is, you know, becoming a bigger push from the other side because it is their plan B. And this is what I mean by that. The other side has long had an agenda to stop us from getting protections for LGBT people. They have wanted us not to get civil rights protections in employment or housing or public accommodations. They fought us on the freedom to marry. They fought to keep exclusions of gay people and trans people from being adoptive or foster parents.
They fought us on making sex legal.
Absolutely, on a very basic issue. And as we have made progress on all of those fronts, securing not all the rights we need, but more and more of them, the other side has turned to religious exemptions as a way to license discrimination, to authorize discrimination in the name of religion. And the reason that I think it's important to think about it this way is that we ensure that we are not confused about what's going on here. Religious liberty is important in America. It's protected by the Constitution, and it's protected by some federal laws, and it should be. This is not about religious freedom. This is about an attempt to discriminate. This is about licensing discrimination. And it's easy for people to be confused about what's going on because we too value religious freedom in this country. But this steps over a line very clearly. Back in February, there was a leaked version of an executive order from President Trump that would have instructed a whole range of federal agencies to write regulations and do other things that would have authorized discrimination. There was a big pushback in the press, and that didn't get signed. Later, March, April, May, I forget when it was, sometime this spring, the president does finally sign an executive order. There's not a whole lot in it. Basically says to the Attorney General Sessions, issue guidance, write some guidance, and that's the guidance that came out on Friday. So,
If I may, written with Alliance Defending Freedom, which is the right-wing legal group, wrote this with the Justice Department.
yes, there's clearly a lot of discussions between certain segments of society and this Justice Department.
There was also a note, though, that Sessions had consulted with the ACLU.
Yes, certainly there's a note in there that says that, designed to suggest that they've been reaching out to everybody. People from the ACLU did go in to meet with them at their request. We laid out all the reasons that the stuff that they have now written doesn't make any sense, is inconsistent with the Constitution and with longstanding federal law. They clearly ignored everything we said and simply had that meeting in order to be able to put a line in their memo that says, oh, we talked to the ACLU.
So talk about specifically what they are telling people they can now do, and maybe what we can do if we have moral objections to people.
Well, so we are at a stage of, so this is guidance. Let's talk about what the guidance does and doesn't mean. The guidance is the federal government's view on what the law is. So this is not just the Justice Department's view, but it binds federal agencies across the federal government. About what does the Religious Freedom Restoration Act mean, what does Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 mean, and various other things. But it also guides them in terms of the positions that the government will take in litigation, and it guides them in terms of how they will write and interpret regulations in every government agency that there is, and it also guides how federal agencies that contract with businesses or provide grants to social service agencies, for example, homeless shelters, to provide services, how they write those grants and how they interpret those grants. So this is, just by itself, something that can have an effect in many, many different parts of the federal landscape.
And we've seen them start to do that already by changing the Obama Justice Department's argument 180 degrees on several cases and guidelines.
And we are going to see more of that.
So does this mean, as of today, that I work for a federal agency, the Social Security Administration, and I object to gay relationships, so I don't have to process a claim for benefits from a same-sex couple?
That's one of the things it may mean. That's certainly, we have to see what HHS does, or the IRS does, in terms of implementing this. But that is the kind of thing that this guidance is aimed at ensuring.
Right,
now, at the same time, they are saying, but of course, none of this means that we're going to violate any actual laws. This is just our attitude.
Yes, and look, and that's simply because they're saying, well, we think the law means X and not Y. So what's at issue here is, what does, for example, the federal ban on sex discrimination, what does it mean? And what does the RFRA, the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, what does it mean? And let me see if I can give you an example of a case or two where this guidance might well result in a different outcome. Consider the context of religious schools or hospitals. There's a series of cases where religious schools have fired women who got pregnant outside of a marriage, but it's clear that they're not firing guys who get women pregnant outside of a marriage. And those women have sued and said, look, this is sex discrimination. You're treating the guys who do this very thing one way and the women who do this very thing a different way. And the school says, yeah, but look, this violates our religious beliefs. You're not behaving like a good religious person. And they say that should be a defense to a claim of sex discrimination. And the courts say no. No, this is, you can prefer members of your own religion when you're hiring, if you're a religiously affiliated organization, but that doesn't mean that you can engage in sex discrimination or race discrimination or other kinds of discrimination. Those cases, under Sessions' guidance, would likely come out differently, because if the government's view of what the law is prevails. So the government's position would be, oh, no, they can fire people because their conduct is inconsistent with the religious beliefs of the employer.
But if the government's view prevails is an important phrase
Caveat,
there, because
absolutely.
What they're putting out here as guidance is their wish list, their interpretation of what they think the laws should be,
yes.
But none of it is actually changing any laws. It's relying on the courts to interpret their interpretation.
Yes.
Now, I would suspect that the Hobby Lobby case was a horrible linchpin in this that really changed the landscape and left us in a very vulnerable position.
Maybe you'd like to explain what that is.
In the end, this is going to depend on the courts, which of course the Justice Department, the Trump administration is changing day by day. But and it, you know, it makes your work so much huger and bigger to have to go fight all these things when they try to do this. But the courts can still save us on all this.
The courts could save us, and you're
totally stay with Hobby Lobby, because Hobby Lobby was a private business which invoked its religious views.
Yes.
And this guidance says private businesses under Hobby Lobby can start discriminating.
Indeed. And so to give you another example of a case where this guidance could make a difference, there's a case brought by the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, against a funeral home in Michigan. And there was a woman named Amy Stevens who had worked as a funeral director for 5-6 years there, presenting as a man, comes out to her boss, the owner of the funeral home, as a woman, and he fires her. And so she sues, or the EEOC sues on her behalf, saying that's sex discrimination. And she loses because the federal trial court says, oh, yeah, that's sex discrimination, but RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, says that if it violates the religious beliefs of this private company's owner, that owner can fire her, and it doesn't make any difference if there's a civil rights law that says that's discrimination.
All right. Now, all these guidances, actually, well, we can talk about the transgender guidance, but the religious freedom guidance doesn't actually specifically mention LGBTQ, even though it's aimed at us almost entirely. But it does open up a Pandora's box in terms of saying civil rights laws don't matter anymore. You just decide things based on whatever your religious, and they use the word moral, whatever your moral concerns are.
It does. I mean, if this guidance and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act are interpreted to mean that religious beliefs get you out of civil rights laws, it's a huge exemption. It is a huge change because it authorizes discrimination not just against LGBT people, that's obviously a big deal, against women, against religious minorities, against anybody based on race.
Racial minorities.
Absolutely. So it's an extraordinarily large threat here. And you're right, we have to see in the end what is it the courts say these various laws mean. What the difference is, right now in Amy Stevens' case, which was just argued last week before the Federal Appeals Court in Cincinnati, the Justice Department didn't show up in that case. The EEOC was still on our side, and they brought the case. The ACLU is privileged to represent Amy Stevens as an individual. In the future, or going forward, to the extent this case continues, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Sessions Justice Department file a brief on the other side of the EEOC.
And the EEOC could switch sides with its new composition.
And it could.
Is this going to come down in the end to a fight between the religious liberty clause in the First Amendment versus equal protection?
Well, look, I think that is part of what's going on here, and the other piece of it is that this guidance that came out on Friday is all about religious liberty. But the same folks who are trying to use these religious liberty arguments to undermine LGBT rights and other civil rights laws are also using free speech arguments and freedom of expression, freedom of artistic freedom arguments to do the same thing. And there's a case called Masterpiece Cake Shop that's before the U.S. Supreme Court. And in that case, both the religion and the speech arguments are front and center. Alliance Defending Freedom is
now scheduled for oral arguments December 5th at the
5th.
Supreme Court.
And it's actually in this case, the speech arguments about artistic freedom are actually where the advocates are spending most of their time. ADF is pushing hard on that, and they haven't given up.
Defending Freedom.
The right wing.
The right
but
wing.
the best way I heard that case described recently, and maybe this was in a court decision, was that you're not discriminating against some particular expression. You're discriminating against gay people.
Yeah, I mean, this case is about whether there is a constitutional right for people to discriminate based on either their religious beliefs or their sort of personal beliefs about what opinions they want to express in the world.
Right.
Well,
they're saying
we
in
know-
speech, I mean, any service, not just baking a cake, but any service, waiting a table, whatever, could be described as expression in some way that you're putting yourself into. And I don't want to do it for gay people, or I don't want to do it for black people. And this is my speech right. And I want to put up a sign. That's my free speech right, saying we don't like you here.
The Attorney General and his cohorts in and out of government have explicitly stated they want a theocracy. They want biblical law to overrule civil law. And that looks like where they're trying to head.
Yes, Jeff Sessions is explaining all this on the 700 Club this week. A big, long interview.
Oh, I missed that. All right, well, so in the end, are you pessimistic about our winning this? Are we going through a real hell?
A masterpiece? Well, look,
All of them.
all of it. Well, so look, I think that these are issues that are going to be worked out in the courts. I think that to date, in the courts, we're doing very well. The courts have rejected religious exemption claims in case after case after case about wedding-related services and other contexts like that. What is it going to look like going forward with the Justice Department on the other side of these cases? We'll see. I think that the argument that either religion or free speech gives you an out from civil rights laws would be so devastating to the civil rights structure that we've built up in this country and to the fabric of society that I am hopeful that a majority of judges in the country are not going to go there.
I mean, that's why it was so encouraging to read about these people in Mississippi, that the Mississippi newspapers went and interviewed and said, "Are you going to start, turning away gay people?" Absolutely not. Money is green. We take it. We don't care. These are bakers, any people who do weddings, all this kind of stuff. At most, people, I think, are not going to want to do this, but there are going to be some, and who will act this way.
Yeah, and look, I do think that the reality is that most small businesses in this country are not looking to discriminate. Most small businesses in this country, the polling says, don't agree with the idea that their religious beliefs should get them out of a civil rights law. But this stuff is worth fighting for because it sets a tone and it sets a set of rules for the country. And in some of these contexts, especially in the legislative context, in the state legislatures, the exemptions that are being proposed are exemptions that would apply only to the context of LGBT discrimination. So if it's imposed by the court, the Supreme Court, through the Constitution, it's going to apply to every kind of discrimination. If it's created in the legislature, it's just about LGBT people, and that waters down the civil rights protections and says, you guys are different.
And especially for ignorant people who say, my church condemns you, my government now condemns you, says it's okay to do this, and people take it out on us in terms of violence and things.
And it's bad enough that you get personally rejected to your face in a cake shop, to lose your job, to lose your home, to lose your children, all of that, it just escalates. It
escalates, and access to medical care as well. And look, the one thing that makes me want to say is, I don't think any of us is diminishing the importance or the significance of being turned away, even in the context of a wedding cake. Of course, these people could go someplace else to get a wedding cake.
Most of them.
Yeah, most people can. But but that's not the point. But also, there's a lasting harm here that comes from that, because just one story from our clients, Dave and Charley, the guys who are the plaintiffs in essence in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. Dave tells a story after they get turned away from the bakery. Charley is out. He's got something happens to his car. He needs help. He calls Dave. Dave calls AAA to get them to come help Charley. And Dave realizes when he gets off the phone, I didn't identify him as my husband. Why? Because he was worried about, okay, I don't know who these people are. I want to make sure that Charley gets helped and not attacked, or that somebody shows up. So there are consequences to being turned away, and it's something that we internalize and carry with us, and it changes our behavior going forward. That's the reason that it's not okay to say, okay, well, you know what, just go down the street to some other place.
Absolutely. Let's get up to date on the transgender and the military cases. I'm happy to see the 114 members of Congress are calling the President Trump's bluff and asking the Department of Defense for all the documents about all the advice they gave him on doing this.
And all the input that he got before he
yes,
he tweeted
from all the generals. But you are in court on trying to stop this, and you and others have asked for injunctions against them kicking people out or stopping services. And the Department of Justice has replied by saying, well, there's been no harm yet, so you don't need an injunction.
Yeah, and so we're still in the process of putting together our reply papers, but the idea that there's no harm yet is laughable. There are people whose surgeries have been canceled, and people who it's not clear that they're going to be able to re-enlist when their enlistments are up. So,
not to mention the psychic harm you've just described with Dave and Charley.
It seems like there's no question that there's something to fight about here, because there's no question that there's a clear policy change happening in March, pursuant to the president's orders, and there are consequences of that are happening right now. As you mentioned, there are 4 different cases pending in different parts of the country by a range of different advocacy organizations. They're all asking for injunctions, and there's now a hearing set on November the 9th in the ACLU's lawsuit against the Trump administration in Baltimore, and I assume that there will be a hearing set on the injunction claims in the other cases in relatively short order.
Now, the ACLU doesn't actually take stands on judicial nominees.
Correct.
You might give us some information about them and things like that. But when I look at some of these people, Jeff Mateer, who says we're part of Satan's plan, he's up in Texas, and Amy Barrett, who has, signed some statement saying she's beholden to some religious cult or something like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, are there not 3 senators in this country from the Republican side who might say that's a little extreme, and we're not going to let that happen? I mean, if these kind of people get on the bench for life, where are we?
That is a challenging situation, and I individually applaud the individuals and organizations that are out there making noise and sounding the alarm around these nominations.
But it doesn't look like the Republican senators are going to choose that battleground to fight the administration.
They haven't so far.
Yeah. What about this? What about what HHS did this week in withdrawing a certain kind of LGBT senior protection, that the Obama administration had put in there, saying, well, it's moot because you've got Obergefell and you're covered. But advocates are saying, no, we needed this explicit mention of LGBT seniors in here.
So I think that those rules were created after the Windsor decision, but before the Obergefell decision. So there was a sort of a world where you had to make sure that people's marriages got respected, even if they weren't recognized as married by the state they lived in, but they were recognized as married by the state that they got married in. After Obergefell, we don't have that problem. It may be that there's a remaining problem there. I am not sure that if there is, I do not understand it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think you will not lack for work in the next 100 years.
Yes, indeed.
Or until this nightmare
But
dissolves.
how can people learn more about the ACLU LGBT and HIV project? They can go to aclu.org and read all about it.
Yep, aclu.org/LGBT.
That's it.
All right, James. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Take care of yourself.
Yes,
We'll
because we
see you
need
soon.
you.
Yeah. Good luck. Keep us up to date on everything.
Thank you.
And we will keep our viewers up to date.
So did you have a nice National Coming Out Day, Ann? What happened?
Busier than expected. So we have been telling you for the last couple of weeks that we were going to have this lovely little ceremony at the Stonewall National Monument down in Greenwich Village in New York City. to dedicate the raising of the rainbow flag on a big flagpole there in the National Monument, the first rainbow flag permanently flying on federal land. And we thought, oh, isn't this sweet?
So when a pre-story went out about it in Newsweek, where one of the organizers said, you know, it's going to go up on federal land despite all that's going on in the Trump administration, they took this as a slight in the Trump administration. We don't know if it was the Interior Department, somebody higher up at the Park Service, but they said...
No, the Park Service is under the Interior
They
Department.
are. Well, I mean,
or
you know,
the White House.
Or the White
wherever.
House. So whatever. That made the Park Service have to scramble to discover, they said, that the flagpole on which this sits, do we have a picture of the flag? There it is. It's sort of at the, just outside the actual Christopher Park, which is part of, which is the federal land. They said, that's not on federal land, so you're not putting a flag up on federal land. Go right ahead. But we don't want the Parks Department to be a part of it. The other flag you can't see there is the City Parks Department,
well,
because it's been turned over to the, it's been turned over now to the city.
Yes.
Because they don't want any responsibility for it.
So all was going fine with the National Park Service employees in New York City who were collaborating with us for weeks to arrange this ceremony. Everybody was very friendly. Everything was great. And then literally the day before this ceremony, yesterday as we're taping, we get a call from these people saying, sorry, the National Park Service is withdrawing sponsorship of this event because we have discovered, much to our amazement, that this flagpole is not federal land. And so we've turned the flag itself over to the city. They have agreed to take ownership of this.
They might even put up a bigger one.
Yes. So we knock our heads together and we say, this is outrageous. So we put out a very angry press release last night.
It was going to be a nice little low-key, all-American celebration of us and our inclusion in society, and it turned out to be a semi-protest against the way they treat us, even in this petty way.
And then once we put out this press release blasting the Trump administration, not our local Park Service people, because we still like them, blasting them for making this change and being unwilling to associate even in this tiny way with our community, we get a call from the local Park Service people again saying, oh, we'd like to show up anyway and talk and explain the misunderstanding. We said, misunderstanding? Yeah, you come down there tomorrow and we'll talk to you about it. And we talked to the guy and we said, so how did this happen? And he says, well, yes, you know, we had this all arranged, and yes, the Park Service flag does fly on the flagpole that we now say is not federal land. And yes, Newsweek wrote that little piece, and then the people in Washington noticed this from the Newsweek piece, and they decided, no, we're not going to let this happen. And we said, well, then we're not going to let you speak. And we're going to blast the Trump administration. Well, this is the latest outrage.
This was wrenching. And Michael Petrelis, who got the permit for this thing, he's a San Francisco activist who was telling us, there he is, that we should have the rainbow flag up there. He made it a big cause of his. He got the permit. And what he said was, when he was speaking there was, my God, in Egypt, you know, people raised the rainbow flag at a concert and they got arrested and beaten and are being threatened with life imprisonment in one case.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was dedicating it to those people. But what did you say about this, the way the sleaziness and everything of this?
Petty, sleazy, transparently lying about this. It's just that they think we are so disgusting and so filthy that they cannot even let a little flag, a little rainbow flag, fly on federal land. I blame Trump. I blame Ryan Zinke of the Interior Department. I blame Tony Perkins and Mike Pence, who have undoubtedly been...
I raised the flag on federal land today.
They're the ones who are filthy. It's just, you know, this is the smallest of our concerns, and yet so emblematic of how we are treated and how they want to continue to deprive us of any legitimacy as regular human beings.
Another concern that was concern we have is staying with our viewers in Philadelphia. We've been on WYBE for a long time now, and I've enjoyed a relationship with you there, but they're ending.
They're going off the air.
They're going off the air. So we're working on trying to find another outlet down there. And you can always see us by going online at gayusatv.org. Plus, if you can sign up for our email list there, you can get notice when we finally do get somebody in Philadelphia to carry us. We'll tell you about it.
We absolutely are going to have a new outlet in Philadelphia. We are just figuring out what the exact details of that will be. So I hope we will be on the air continuously in Philadelphia after WYB goes off the air at the end of this month. But if not, if there's a little interim, I promise you we will be back on the air. And yes, you can watch us on gayusatv.org in the meantime.
All right.
All right.
In other news, and things we did not talk to James about.
Yeah.
I see that there's a hell of a controversy going on up at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Well, the woman who works for student health there has been giving out, transgender health services, and they're saying you can't do that. And she's been doing it for a long time, and they're stopping her. So there's a complaint filed, and they're facing 3 civil rights complaints about her dismissal for this.
Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas, as you know, has been nominated to work for the State Department running their Office of International Religious Freedom because, screwing us in the United States is not enough.
And because he's the worst possible person to have this job.
Yeah, so he is being asked at his Senate hearing, what about rescinding this executive order there was from the previous governor in Kansas, Sebelius, that was a non-discrimination law for sexual orientation and gender identity that just covered government employees. And he said, well, she bypassed the legislature on this, so of course I had to rescind those protections.
Anne, he refused at this hearing to unequivocally condemn the inhumane treatment, including execution of people based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
These people are extreme. They are extreme.
Because that's what the Bible says. It is an abomination, and they shall be put to death. And that is a very bad thing to have written in the Bible, God. That
is the principle on which they are operating and making these decisions and issuing these guidelines. And as I explained to you off camera before we started, the parallel I see here with the Harvey Weinstein situation is everybody is complaining and upset that no one blew the whistle on Harvey Weinstein for decades, even though they're making jokes about him on 30 Rock and at the Oscar nominations. No one blew. No, at the nomination ceremony. They are announcing the nomination.
Sorry.
So everyone, why didn't anyone speak up about this? Well, why aren't the Republicans in Congress speaking up about the Trump administration?
Fear.
Why are they holding back?
National Coming Out Day is about not living our lives in fear. Leslie Kagan, who spoke at the ceremony today, said you've got to come out, and you've got to come out every day, and you've got to do it all over again, and we have to keep doing it. And that is what we do.
But if you want to know what they really think and what they're really planning, perhaps you would like to tune into what I assume will be on C-SPAN at the end of this week, the Values Voters Summit.
God.
The annual celebration by these crazies at which our president and vice president will be speaking along with all the haters who would like to execute us.
Not to mention the majority whip Steve Scalise, who was saved by a lesbian when he was shot, and she was shot.
A married lesbian.
Michelle Bachmann, Duck Dynasty's Phil Robertson. You shouldn't appear on platforms with these people. But that is 80% of fundamentalists voted for Trump, and that is who he is holding on to.
He's not,
and he's giving them everything they want, and we worry about losing the Stonewall National Monument because that's on their hit list of things that they want rescinded.
But I would rather retain my dignity than worry about losing the National Monument.
Well, did you read that the Justice Department is organizing a memo on how to go after black identity extremists?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That would be people who take a knee at a football game.
Yeah, that kind
Black
of stuff.
identity extremists.
That kind of stuff.
The FBI, yes, is targeting them.
And by the way, the Family Research Council is launching a hotline for federal employees and contractors and citizens who believe they've suffered discrimination based on their religion. So if you were a subject to if you're subject to discrimination because of this kind of thing, you need to call the ACLU, Lambda, or one of your local civil rights groups.
That's correct. And meanwhile, as we said to James Esseks, the Department of Justice has put out these religious liberty guidelines. And yes, they brought in the ACLU for a pro forma meeting. But the other people they consulted on this were the Mormons, the Catholics, the Alliance Defending Freedom, and every other right-wing religious group they could get their hands on. And yes, Attorney General Sessions put out a memo last week announcing a new policy that the Justice Department does not believe the 64 Civil Rights Act Title VII covers gender identity as sex discrimination.
And the Department of Health and Human Services, even though Tom Price is gone, announced a new rule that would undermine the Affordable Care Act's requirement that all insurance plans cover birth control.
You know, that's, we talk about psychic harm or individual cases, but wiping out birth control coverage?
I mean, which was treated as a joke when it was brought up against Republicans when Mitt Romney was running. Oh, are you kidding? You know, birth control? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of them who votes against birth control and abortion, Tim Murphy, has resigned from Congress because, well, he had a girlfriend who he'd encouraged to have an abortion. Yeah. So he quit.
We need more of that. Now, one case we didn't discuss with James is an ACLU case in the state of Washington.
Yes.
The ACLU is suing a Catholic organization called Peace Health because one of their employees is a woman who has a trans teen son, Pax Enstad. And Pax is 17 and wants chest surgery as he transitions. And Peace Health is a Catholic organization and says, we have a blanket policy, no transgender services. Now, Pax has been diagnosed by a doctor with severe gender dysphoria, and this surgery was prescribed by the doctor. But the mother's employer says they will not cover it because they're Catholics, and the ACLU is suing.
I was going to save it for international news, but it's coming straight from the top. And the Pope Francis this week denounced how new technologies are making it easier for people to change their genders, saying that this utopia of the neutral jeopardizes the creation of new life. Like, we're not overcrowded to begin with. I mean, he is totally invincibly ignorant on this issue. He has in the past compared it to nuclear war. So this is Pope Santa Claus, you know, who is supposed to be so nice. Forget about it.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, in terms of transgender, we didn't talk about the death of Tom Petty. I mean, not a gay man, but a wonderful singer. It was noted that on his last tour, he made a big show of support for the transgender community, putting an image of transgender actress Alexis Arquette up there on the screen as part of the montage. So he did that very wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Yes, oral arguments on the Masterpiece Cake Shop case are scheduled in the Supreme Court for December 5th. We'll follow that. Yes, the Mississippi Hateful Religious Freedom broad law that specifically says you can discriminate if you object to people having sex outside marriage, if you object to transgender people, if you object to same-sex couples getting married, you may discriminate against those people specifically. That is now the law in Mississippi, certainly under challenge by many of us. But the local newspapers went around to clerks and stores and asked them whether they would be taking advantage of this law, and the people they found so far said no.
Well, a lot of the clerks said, we don't want to be sued. You know,
yes,
that's what
and they would be.
Yes, and the other good news is from Utah. Now, follow this. The Utah legislature passed what's called a no promo homo law. You know, and you can't promote homosexuality in the schools. And so equality,
which means you can't discuss homosexuality in the schools.
So Equality Utah sued over this, and actually the legislature backed down and rescinded the legislation, but they didn't end it there. They actually got a settlement from the Department of Education there, a Board of Education there in Utah, that says, included a requirement that state schools develop and implement a safety plan for LGBTQ students targeted by harassment, and that they do deal with these issues. So they've turned it around there, at least in terms of policy. We have a lot of good policies here in New York, and obviously they're not acted upon, so that's where the proof is.
The Rocky Mountain West. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. In an update on the case in Newark, New Jersey, where we showed you the local news report last week of 14-year-old Kylie Perez and her mother, who are fierce activists for Kylie, who is a young trans woman, and who had been set upon by students in the hallway of her school and has been bullied for years. 7 students have now been suspended for attacking her. The school is going to have assemblies educating the students and staff on trans issues, and the cops are investigating to see whether they want to file more serious charges.
Back to the Catholic Church for a moment. This is from Chicago. We tell you about all these, employees of Catholic institutions, gay and lesbian and transgender employees who keep getting fired. Well, they fired a music director there, and a U.S. District Court judge upheld the granted summary judgment to the Chicago Archdiocese, saying, he's the music director. It's a ministerial function. He's the music director. I mean, he doesn't write the liturgy, but that's the way they interpreted it.
He doesn't bless people.
Right.
He doesn't conduct ceremonies.
You just keep firing all those music directors, and you see who you have left.
One good thing to come out of the U.S. Senate this week: the Foreign Relations Committee passed a resolution condemning Chechnya for its treatment of LGBT people. Wouldn't it be nice if they passed a resolution condemning the Trump administration for its treatment of LGBT people?
That Arkansas judge who gave light sentences to men for minor crimes if they gave him nude photographs or sexual favors.
Oh, yeah.
He himself lobbied for a light sentence, and he faced 260 years in prison and $2.5 million in fines. And what did he get? 2.5 to 3 years in prison for wire fraud and witness tampering.
Well, he's a mess. All right, and in Boston, we lost a longtime gay activist, Charles Shively, 79, had Alzheimer's for 10 years in a nursing home.
Well, you want to hear what Larry Kramer said about him? He said, Charlie was the first academic historian who told us Walt Whitman was gay. My goodness. That Abraham Lincoln was gay. That many other famous men in history were gay. His writings, which of course no mainstream outlet would ever publish, well, he wrote for Fag Rag, which I used to read when I was a kid, were finally collected and published by Gay Sunshine Press, where you can still read them. He said he was an inspiring role model. He said, would that gay historians had an ounce of his courage and perseverance. Gay history, as he wrote it and as it should be written, is still a no-show starter. This is a big concern of Larry Kramer, and we have lost Charley Shively, who was a great activist.
In 1977, at a Pride event, he gave the keynote speech. He burned his Harvard degree and pages from the Bible,
which shocked people. even in those days, it was shocking.
In California, Governor Brown has signed a Bill of Rights for LGBTQ seniors in long-term care.
And in D.C., they've got a bill now to eliminate criminal penalties for sex work.
Wow.
I like what the First United Methodist Church of Austin, Texas is doing. They will not officiate at any marriages until the United Methodist Church accepts marriage equality.
Oh my God, that's so retro. When people were doing that back before we had same-sex marriage, all those many years ago.
And this is about their church not doing it.
Yes, I get it.
So,
all right. International news.
Okay, we told you about the Pope. And we told,
Indonesia.
Dozens of men there were, including several foreigners, have been arrested at a raid of a gay sauna. We have a picture there. I think it was 51 men. 58 men.
58.
And they are charging them with all kinds of things, and they face 10 years in prison and fines.
Homosexuality is not illegal in Indonesia, except in the Aceh province, but so they're charging them all with prostitution.
And Chechnya, there's a new wrinkle to the Chechnya thing now. We told you about the persecution of people there. Well, what they're doing now is Chechens are trying to find the ones who fled the country in Canada, in the United States, well, not the United States.
Other parts of Europe.
Yes, they're finding them and trying to beat them up, or reaching them via email and saying, if you don't come back, we're gonna arrest your family and beat them. It's like a criminal syndicate, the whole country.
A moment for some good news. In Kosovo, they held their first Pride Parade.
Yeah.
We have a lovely picture from Kosovo.
This was in the capital.
Any there. I am out, therefore I am.
It's very existential.
I like that. So hundreds of people showed up in Kosovo for their first Pride Parade.
So there's an upside to the Australian postal ballot on marriage equality, which we object to.
Okay, I'll bite.
Young voters are getting so stirred up by this that they're likely to turn out the Prime Minister, the Conservative, Malcolm Turnbull, out of office. Now, he himself is voting for same-sex marriage. A lot of people in his party and the coalition parties are not.
Well,
and the Sydney Anglican Diocese there gave $1 million to the No campaign, and people in the rank and file of the church are saying, $1 million? I mean, we're supposed to be helping the poor, and this is what you're spending it on?
Well, we've had the same argument with both the Mormon and Catholic churches here, which gave millions and millions to anti-same-sex marriage campaigns here. Yeah. But when I first saw this story, I saw Diocese of Sydney gives $1 million to No campaign, and I thought, oh, those Catholics are at it again.
Right.
And then I read the story, Anglicans.
Anglicans.
Oh, my God.
Well, staying in Australia for a second, in New South Wales, you know, there were these gay cops who were targeted by some of their higher-ups, and they said, oh, they were all using drugs and things. So they not only were investigated and cleared, but they're suing the department now for what they say was a homophobic attack on them.
They totally made everything up against them and instituted these wild charges, and they all turned out to be completely false.
Did we get our ruling from Taiwan today yet?
Not that I've seen.
Well,
maybe.
We're expecting one that might affect marriage equality.
But we have a ruling in Nepal from the Supreme Court there that trans people can change their gender and name on all documents.
And how about all those lesbians in Europe? They had the first...
Austria, Vienna.
Yeah.
First European Lesbian Conference. Amazing.
About time.
500 women from 45 countries, 148 cities.
Met for 3 days. And we have a picture of the general group of them at the meeting. Do you have that? There's also,
oh, yeah, they're
look at that. And we have a picture also of a march that they went on. Lesbian is not a dirty word. I remember when the Metropolitan Community Church met at a church, and they had, you know, their name was outside, but when they put "we serve lesbians and gay men," they were thrown out of the church.
They, unsurprisingly, came up with some conclusions that lesbians need, excuse me, it's my weekly coughing fit, more visibility, we need more data, funding, representation.
Well, we have more representation. We have...
Wait.
Okay.
You can find out more about all of this by going to EuropeanLesbianConference.org.
Okay, you got that? And we're going to tell you we're getting more representation. In Uruguay, Michelle Suarez we have a picture. She was made Uruguay's first trans senator, replacing somebody else. She's assuming the position as a substitute for a Communist Party senator, and she was the first transgender lawyer in the country, and she's a big advocate. So she's going to do a lot of good for us there.
In Greece, they have removed the requirement for sterilization for changing your gender. It's a horrible thing that is still hanging on in a lot of European countries, that in order to have gender change
Yes.
in your documents, you have to prove that you've been sterilized. They still have too many other hurdles, but they've at least gotten rid of sterilization.
I was very sorry to see the land of my people on my father's side, Romania, that Kim Davis was over there campaigning against same-sex marriage. Now, they have collected enough signatures to force the legislature to consider a referendum on this. The prime minister is against it, so the legislature, there's some resistance in the legislature. They don't have to do it.
The fine folks at the Liberty Council, cousin to the Alliance Defending Freedom, have taken Kim over there to campaign against marriage equality in Romania.
All right. Now, you give those gays an inch, they take a mile. So as soon as they had same-sex marriage in Germany, 2 men adopted a kid. They has the first time legally adopt 2 men in Berlin have become the first same-sex couple to adopt a child. Adoption was something resisted by all the European countries, even after they did same-sex relationships. And in Germany, a German Catholic bishop barred the blessing of a same-gender couple. And the only thing that's interesting about this is that that's somewhat controversial. A blessing, not a wedding, a blessing, because they do it for animals and things like that, and wine, I don't know, whatever. And so there are people speaking up about this, and there are other bishops speaking up about this. As we can give them a blessing.
Okay, anything else?
Why not? The Greek Parliament passed a...
we just did that.
We did that. So, all right, so let's move on to AIDS news.
Sad, we've heard all the terrible news out of Puerto Rico about people still with no drinking water, no food, no electricity. Well, one of the things that's a problem in Puerto Rico is that's where a lot of the pharmaceutical manufacturers have located their factories, because they were given a lot of incentives to locate there. So there is an over-concentration of pharmaceutical manufacturers there, and they are as decimated as everyone else. And so that is interfering with production of medicine. And they're trying to fly in generators and get back up to speed, but there are going to be some interruptions in availability of medicine because of the hurricane.
There's going to be an interruption on November 1st when we try to get health plans for next year, too, under the Affordable Care Act that they're destroying. Governor Brown did sign that law decreasing HIV criminalization in California.
And reform of the sex offender registry. It's now in 3 tiers. You can be forced to be on the sex offender registry for a lifetime, for 20 years, or for 10 years. I think when you're having like consensual sex in the park and you're convicted of being a sex offender, any time on a registry is ridiculous.
Registry. And not to depress you too much, but the bacteria that have a gene that causes resistance to the last line of defense for antibiotics is spreading. They're very worried about this. They're working on something new, but they don't got anything right now.
I've been reading up on natural antibiotics.
All right, entertainment news?
Because I have this cold, which I know is not in need of an antibiotic. Okay. Entertainment news. All right, well, episode 2, I've now given up on Will and Grace. Well, not entirely, but the second episode was horrible, horrible, about intergenerational dating, and it was just awful.
Well,
Yeah.
We have enough to keep up with the news. Apple, the company, has shared previews for a new set of emojis that are coming out later this month. We have pictures. They will include gender-neutral characters spanning age ranges from children to elders.
And available in all races.
Yes, all skin tones. They are also adding an emoji of a male fairy. That's what it says, and I love you. And I love you in American Sign Language. They've launched actually. They were available on Monday, so go check them out.
Condé Nast has decided that we are a consumer opportunity. So they're launching a new LGBTQ media brand called Them. Why not us? Them.
Us versus them, it sounds like.
Debuts
them?
Thursday.
That's kind of offensive.
them. Thursday, October 26th. It's youth-driven. They are partnering with GLAAD.
I'll wait till I see it. Maybe it's
Burberry, Lyft, and Google. You can find them at them.us.
Maybe it's meant ironically.
Them.us.
Maybe it's meant ironically.
They'll be on Facebook and Instagram,
As
too.
perhaps this, well, you know, on Jeopardy the other night, the answer was this MSNBC host has recalled life as one of only 2 out students at Stanford in the early 1990s. First person guessed Anderson Cooper. He's not on MSNBC, didn't go to Stanford, but of course it was Rachel Maddow. Nobody guessed Brian Williams, but you know.
The idea that there were only 2 out students at Stanford in the early 1990s is insane.
We have concluded that she was probably being
facetious?
Yes.
Hyperbolic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Got a couple of movies coming out.
Please, we had a lesbian cabal at Vassar in the late 60s, and we were the inheritors of a whole history of that throughout time.
What about the group?
Exactly.
Mary McCarthy.
Exactly.
That's like the 50s, isn't it, or 40s?
Yeah. Wolf Girls at Vassar is the book about lesbians at Vassar.
Okay. The Tom of Finland movie, it's a fiction film, a dramatic film. That's going to open on Friday at the Quad in New York.
And a week later in LA and San Francisco, and then around the country. This movie has been very well reviewed, Tom of Finland. It's been playing film festivals. It's a biopic with actors and is getting a lot of notice.
A couple of performances in New York, and if you want details about this, I'll put them in our email, so sign up for our email list at gayusatv.org. Our old friend Tim Miller, the gay performance artist, is going to be at Dixon Place. That's October 14th and 21st. Go to dixonplace.org for that. And there's a new musical that's called Stonewall, A Rhapsody on Resistance. And if you want to go to this thing, it's on October 16th and 17th. But if you want all the details, you've got to send them an email to find out where it is. I'll put that in the email if you want to go to the Stonewall. What is it called? A Rhapsody on Resistance.
And the big opportunity in New York next week is New Fest, the annual LGBT film festival, which has a plethora of opportunities. Opening night, a movie about Suzanne Bartsch. My friend Gail Friedman's Hot to Trot about same-sex ballroom dancing competitions.
And the what's called one of the central films is After Louie, starring Alan Cumming, which is about an aging AIDS activist from ACT UP who was very angry about the world, and it's a terrific film. And we have a picture of a wedding there that Alan Cumming there on the right performed for Anthony Johnston, who's in the middle there, who's an actor in the film, and co-wrote it with Vincent Gagliostro.
Yep.
And he married Jordan Geiger this week. They made a lovely couple, had a great celebration. I haven't seen so much love in a room in a long time, and it was a great relief from the week we've been going through.
But go to newfest.org to see the full schedule of films, October 19th through 24th here in New York at several theaters, and always a big popular event. And not to end on a downer, but Harvey Weinstein not only donated to various Democratic politicians, he also donated to gay organizations.
Yes.
And we haven't heard from them about returning those donations.
And poor Harvey Fierstein has been confused with him this week, and people are calling him and saying, "What did you do?" He said, "I'm not Harvey Weinstein, I'm Harvey Fierstein."
All right, on that note, I think
we survived this week. We hope to be back next week with you. Thanks for watching.
And you can see the rainbow flag flying on that flagpole in the village, but it's not on federal land.
It's on city land.
Yeah. Bye-bye.